might run into in the future. And people ask you questions. Just what is a resource-based economy? The decision-making system of the future government. Who makes the decisions and by what authority? And what if two architects disagree on the city design? What do you do? I'm going to try to explain that. Now, if I fail to do that, you have to let me know. If you don't do that, you won't learn. Okay? How do they decide how many passengers an airplane can carry? Does anybody have any idea? Somebody makes a decision that the airplane is going to carry 200 or 150 people. Do you know how they do that? By the wing area and the horsepower. Do they know, once you know that it's 150 people, and you know how long the trip is going to take, you do a guess at how much food is necessary to feed 150 people, and you get somewhat, maybe 3-4 more servings in advance of that. That's how they plan. Now, how much fuel do you put in? That depends on how long the trip is. None of those decisions are made by, I think we ought to have 50 gallons. Or another, what do you think? He said 30 gallons, and that's Congress, that's politics. In the sciences, all decisions are not made, they're arrived at. Do you know the difference? If you don't, please say you don't get it. They are arrived at, meaning if I say to you, you have 400 acres of land with rich soil, you know you can grow so many carrots or so many beans. But if you grow more, you can exhaust the soil faster. Who decides that? The Department of Agronomy. That's food experts. They tell you if you can pump chickens so they grow faster, you can get them to market sooner. But that means their cells multiply faster, which means it may induce cancer 10 years from now. So the health department oversees, since there's no money in the system, how much you can grow chickens faster. But you have to have two groups. The group that plans the city and the group that finds fault with the city. So if we design a city, I might like it, but you work for the negative virtual action studies of the damage that that city does to the environment, or production plans or anything. Everything is based upon surveys. No more what do you think or what do you think. Because if you do that, you have a democracy, but a decaying civilization. Democracy is a foolish term because the public thinks that they participate. The truth is, when you want to build a bridge, you get bridge engineers. You never invite the public. When the public says to me, is your system a democracy? Well, I say, what does democracy mean to you? It means that I will participate. I could. We're building a bridge in this area. Will you participate? I don't know anything about bridge building. We want to grow more food to feed the people in the world. What do you suggest? I don't know. You'll find out that people will admit that they can't participate. When you want to put a man on the moon, you don't get the average person together. Say, what do you think? You get rocket experts, celestial mechanics, space scientists. You get them together. Do you understand that? That means it's a group based upon predictability. Now, I don't know if you know this, but on the Earth, as you run trains north and south, the tracks on the right side wear out faster. Because you know what the Coriolis effect is? The Earth is turning, so the trains lean more and one wheel wears out faster. So they tilt the tracks this way to compensate so that the weight of the train is even on both sides. That's not made by what do you think or what do you think. It's based on wear and tear on trains. So everybody doesn't know what I'm talking about? All right, now, if you grow food in the fields and you spray poisons on to keep the insects off, that increases toxemia in humans, or cancer, or other disorders. So how can you prevent rabbits and rats from eating food without spraying poison? Ask that of any normal person. They usually don't know. But if you're in the sciences, you can say maybe we can generate certain sounds that man can't hear that keep rats away. There are units you can buy in your hotel, and it generates a sound that you can't hear, but it keeps rats and flies out. But there's some insects that are good for plants, so you have to study the sound range. Beep, 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 real high, and find out what effect it has on different type of insects. That is how you say, if a person says to me they shouldn't spray plants, well, what do you suggest? They don't know. Well, they say to me, I don't like to experiment on animals. I think that's not right. Well, what do you suggest we do with a new injection for infantile paralysis? What do you suggest? Well, I don't know. Now, what are you talking about? Unless you can suggest something to deal with a problem. Do you understand? Now, mattresses in hotels are usually a foam rubber, usually. Well, there are bubbles in the foam rubber. In the future, instead of bubbles, there'll be CO2 gas in the rubber. So if you dropped a cigarette on your mattress, it would put it out. But people say, there's a terrible fire in a hotel, what do you suggest? I don't know, then shut up. Go to work, try to find out what makes those things happen. Now, if a guy, mysteriously, they say there are 27 girls in the city killed by a serial killer. They ought to catch that son of a bitch. How do you suggest we catch him? They don't know. Well, what do you do when you catch him? Well, I burn them alive. See, the point is, what made him that way? So let's find out what makes a serial killer and try to get rid of the conditions that produce it. That's what a resource-based economy is. But a free democratic society is if some politician gets up and speaks and you vote for him. He's totally not qualified. Don't take my word for it, ask him questions. Okay? Now, why does a person steal? Because either they can get money for what they stole, or why does a person sell drugs? Because they get money. Not only that, if you work as a dishwasher, you never earn enough to get by. You're going to have to live far out of town and spend an hour driving to work, because you can't afford to live in a certain hotel. It's just too expensive. So you live far away. He has to buy a used car, because he doesn't have the money to buy a new car. And he has to drive, and the wear and tear on a used car is higher than a new car. And he has to contend with that. But if he's got 3 kids, and one gets sick, he can't take him to a doctor every time he gets sick. He doesn't earn that much. So he hopes the kid will get well in 3 days. If he doesn't, kid gets worse. He has to take it to a clinic where he has to sit all day, next, and that costs a day's pay. Do you understand? So the guy is in shit up to here. So he says, hey, if you sell drugs, you can make $1,000 a week. He says, well, that would hurt people. They don't give a shit about you. Why do you care about them? He says, that's true. See, so he'll get in a drug. If he's caught, too bad. He may be put away for 10 years. And that's not right. People are put under conditions of stress, and they obey those laws. They become corrupt or less corrupt. Now, is that true of industry? Yes. If the men go out on strike, say they make $10 a week, now they make $20 a week. The price of the car goes up. But the working people have it a little better. But the company doesn't take the loss. You pay for all advertising on TV. Although you see it's General Motors, they add that to the car cost. And usually price of products about 5 times the production cost. So we're talking about production costs.
Wow, is there any space?
So if a person works for any industry, say cigarettes, If the government is there to protect people, how come they sell cigarettes? Cigarettes always produce cancer. Maybe 20 years or 15 years, but it does produce lung cancer and heart conditions and high blood pressure and many others. Why does the government participate in cigarettes? Because they tax cigarettes and the government gets that money. That means that they don't care for people. Now let's say the government doesn't like another country. Suppose you live next door to a guy that annoys the hell out of you. He plays the saxophone real loud, you tell him to stop it, the kids can't sleep, I can't sleep, my wife can't sleep, and he doesn't stop it. And you tell him 10 times he doesn't, and you shoot him. You get the electric chair or they hang you. If the government gets mad at another nation, it kills them. They're all murderers. Only killing one person is not too bad. But when the government gets mad, they'll bomb a whole nation flat. They're all murderers. The soldiers are considered defenders of the country. They are assassins for that country. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, if another country invades your country, then you have to have an army to protect it. Otherwise, they'll take everything, all the resources. You have to protect your resources, so you have to maintain a certain amount of taxes to keep police and armies, navies, war tanks, battleships. The battleships catch them way out at sea, but if you can't afford battleships, you have a small standing army, and the guys can come in from the sea. So you're in trouble. So they signed an agreement with England, France, U.S. to protect them if U.S. needs your resources, oil, whatever it is. So all agreements signed by nations are made to protect all the nations. If you sign a treaty with another country that you won't do this or won't do that, if that doesn't serve your interests, your national interest, you will violate it. Now you can look that up. Most treaties are violated if they don't serve the interests of that nation. So nations have to be, you have to read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Did anybody ever read that yet? U.S. sends people out to get them. They say, if you're a chief of a certain country, they say, we'd like you to go along with American policy. He said, well, let me think about it. They said, well, we'll deposit $50,000 in the Swiss bank for you. But if you don't go along with us, I can't tell you what will happen. So they knock them off or have a helicopter crash or whatever they have to do to get you out of the way. For example, if Castro succeeded in Cuba and the standard of living went up, all of Latin America would go communist. So we don't want Castro to succeed. So we fly airplanes over Cuba from high altitude and drop little units that set their sugar cane on fire. We create problems so it won't work. Do you understand that? If we don't do that, we will lose Latin America and a lot of small countries. So when I say all nations are corrupt, they all want to survive. And if your country can support my country, we can survive. Now if you say to me, we grow a lot of cotton here, will America buy it? Yes, we'll buy all the cotton you can grow. But if you don't go along with it, we're not going to buy any cotton. And we'll even try to prevent other nations from selling you machines that process cotton. That's called withdrawal of efficiency. You know, they don't use those words. So we make it tough for people that don't sign agreements with us. But that's true for all countries. Now, to move from this country, from a money system to a resource-based economy, will not occur if people are working, have houses and cars, they're satisfied. And you can't afford to feel for every underprivileged person. You can feel for them, but if you support them and it keeps growing, there comes a time when you don't support them. There are too many of them. In New York, when the Depression happened, when the banks fell, normal people bought apples and were selling apples. They were selling pencils, cups, all kinds of things, hot coffee. Now it was 25 cents, you got a sandwich and a guy wore a tank around his neck with hot coffee. He turned the valve, he got coffee. And he got one sandwich, one cigarette sealed, and one piece of chocolate for 25 cents. That was a growing business at that time. Another growing business during the Depression in America was sign painting, selling out, going out of business, half price. So they survived. If you study what survived during the Depression, you can make it for a while. Do you understand? But if you're charitable, when you meet a guy and says, brother, can you spare a dime for a cup of coffee? You say, well, okay. When there's 20 people, you're less apt to do that. When 500 out of work, you say, tough shit, tough I'm a guy. Well, study a profession that'll get you going again. Well, during the Depression, there's only so much room for lawyers. I don't know if you know what lawyers did in New York during the Depression. They used to chase ambulances. You ever hear of that? To see if they get a guy that was injured, can I defend you against this corporation that ran into you, whatever happened. Lawyers be called ambulance chasers.
You mean literally chase ambulances?
What's that?
You mean literally chase
Yes.
ambulances? I mean, I've heard the...
Or if a guy was hurt, slipped in a department store, guy come over and says, I'm a lawyer, here's my card, we can sue the department store for slick tile floors. Whatever it is, lawyers make money on human misery in most instances. So, you say, well, what about patriotism? Patriotism is for suckers, country boys that want to travel, join the Navy and see the world. They used to write songs when I was a kid. I joined the Navy to see the world, and what did I see? I saw the Atlantic and the Pacific, but the Pacific wasn't terrific, and the Atlantic wasn't what it was cut out to be. That's the way the songs were at. And the American sailors used to go to China, mostly, and they'd buy a lot of stuff and give them coupons, cigar store coupons. You know what they are? Every time you buy a box of cigars, you save the coupons, and you send them in, and you get 2 cigars. So the Chinese didn't know the difference between $10 bill and a coupon. So they buy a lot of goods in China, and the Chinese hated the Navy. Can you understand that? Well, the Navy said, they're goddamn chinks, it doesn't make any difference. You understand? So when you begin to teach people that the other people don't count, they're goddamn chinks or slanty-eyed bastards, whatever name they call them, it's a device. All my movies as a kid showed Mexicans sleeping under a big hat in the sun. So Mexicans were always lazy. And blacks were always running away from ghosts. All our movies. And the Italians were all the gangsters. And the Irish were all drunk, alcoholics. Our movies ran that way. So when a guy came with an Irish dialect, you wouldn't hire him, because it looked bad. And so the Arabs were almost all alike. Have you ever been to an Arab country?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me take it roughly what it's like. If you come in as a woman to say, you look like nice Chinese lady, for you I make special price. They said the same thing to everybody, that you look like nice American man, for you I make special price. That's the way they talk. And you say, oh, I'll take 2. And they think, boy, is he dumb. Because the Arabs come and says, how much you want for that? And the guy said, that was made by 10 blind men. It took 10 years to make that. That's all bullshit. And the guy says, how much you want? Always, how much you want? They don't get into discussion. Well, for you, I make $5 for you. And the guy says, I give you $2. $2? No, and they argue for hours. When that guy comes to America, he goes to Sears and Roebuck, and he faces away from the product and he says, how much you want for that? He faces away to show he's not that interested. The clerk doesn't even know. He picks it up and says, $8.95. I give you $2. Son of a bitch foreigner. There's nothing the matter with the guy. Where he comes from, that's normal to bargain for hours. Do you understand that? But we have attitudes about those people, because in America, Sears, big companies have established prices. But a small store, you can say, well, or if you buy a car, guy wants $800, well, you take 600. He says, how about 700? See? So it's all right. In the scarcity country, there's a lot of that, how much you want, and arguing. I'm not talking about good, bad, right or wrong. The scarcity country produces that. Do you understand that? So we're saying this, let's find out what makes humans behave as they do. And any behavior that's detrimental to the majority of people, we will find out what makes it happen and get rid of the conditions that make it. When I was a kid, I was sleeping in the Grand Central Station on a bench because my parents were evicted because they had about $200 to $300 in the bank and the banks failed. And everybody had money in the bank. When they failed, even the small banker committed suicide. They were jumping out of windows. I'm talking about America. I wasn't anyplace else. And so they felt they let down their families. They always wanted to earn enough to send their kids to college, and they felt they were failures. Now the same for criminals. If you were in a department store, ordinarily you won't steal. But if you got 4 kids and you're out of work, you might stick an extra back box of crackers in the bag, you know. And if you're caught, the first time the judge might let you go. But the second time, your kids are still hungry. So you look both ways and you put 2 boxes of crackers. When you're caught, they'll put you in jail for a year. That's 500 boxes of crackers it costs to keep you in jail. So I would say it's easier to give people crackers than put them in jail. Do you understand? Society is very stupid. They do that because jails are good business. They privatize them now. You know what? In America. So the longer the sentence, the more the privatized jails own. Is it? I would say that's essentially money that corrupts people. You can't sell drugs if you live in a land where drugs go all over the place. If orange trees grew all over the place, you couldn't sell oranges. Do you understand that? You can only sell things that are scarce. Have a seat. Okay. So, if you understand those things, conditions generate behavior. Now, I'm going to talk about America. If a bunch of Orientals come to America and they work for half the price, the American worker is displaced. So the goddamn foreigners are coming in taking over everything. It isn't the goddamn foreigners. Industry wants to maintain the competitive edge. And by hiring Orientals or Mexicans, they work for less money. That's why the Americans beat up Mexicans. It's all economics. Do you understand that, or you have trouble with that? Okay. Now, I can tell you if Martians came here and they worked for $50 an hour, or 3 cents an hour, we'd hate the Martians. Okay? Now, we don't know how to look at different people. Because movies, when I was a kid, there was always movies on the Tang Wars, the Chinese fighting each other in Chinatown. And all the Chinese, since they had slanted eyes, they looked like they were suspicious to us. So we call slanty-eyed, sneaky bastards. That was in the movies. All Orientals were sneaking around in all our movies. All cowboys carried 2 guns. When they disagreed with somebody, they shot them. They never sat down and said, let's talk it over. They killed them. And all kids wanted 2 guns, because if one didn't work, the other one did. Now, if you shoot a guy because he insulted you, you shoot him and you miss by 1 inch, you're all right. If you hit him in the heart, you're a murderer. If his aim is bad, he's still a murderer. If he misses with a bow and arrow, he's not a murderer. They say, hey, you shouldn't have done that, that's all. But a difference between a murderer may be 1 inch or less, or bad aim, or a poor gun that's too short and stubby, and the bullet doesn't go where you pointed. So the Army today was always interested in not wasting bullets, so they designed their new guns with a laser beam on top. And when a laser beam is on you, if you pull the trigger, bullets come out. If it's not on you, pull it, nothing comes out. That saves a lot of energy and the guns cost more. So if you manufacture guns, it's good to have a laser beam on it, if you're a murderer. Soldiers are not called murderers, they're called heroes. The more cities you bomb, the more nerve gas you drop. With just flying over a city, you drop napalm. There are kids, families, they have nothing to do with the government, and you burn them. You know what I mean? I think I told you about Hiroshima, did I? The scientist said, drop the bomb 30 miles out at sea, show them what you've got, a terrible weapon, give them a chance to say, geez, we better surrender. But Truman, I told you, President Truman, was a hat salesman before he became president. He was also a member of the political parties. He used to go to the meetings. And he was a jerk, a real stupid guy. And he said, no, we're going to drop the bomb on Nagasaki. If that doesn't work, Hiroshima. So Oppenheimer went to visit him and said, let's do a demonstration. He said, I don't want that guy on the premises anymore. So you got all these different values.
Hello? Yes. Yes. Hi Derek, are you in the hotel?
So, today, I know they're talking,
That's okay.
but
It's room 1514.
if you have any
Okay.
questions, like specific questions that you might have from the last lecture, you might want to hear. I was telling them in Jack that if they have any questions from the last lecture, maybe
sure,
ask.
sure.
Yeah.
I want to
Okay.
make sure you understand
Yes.
what we're trying for.
Mm-hmm.
We think that any political system will become corrupt. Any private business will try to protect its own vehicles, drive a Volkswagen. Now, Ralph Nader hated Germany. He happened to be Jewish, and that made him not want to buy any German products. So he wrote a book, Unsafe at Any Speed. That's the Volkswagen car. And now, is the Volkswagen unsafe at any speed? Well, if a Mack truck hits a Volkswagen, everybody dies in it because of the difference in weight. But as far as economy goes, the Volkswagen was more economical. So Volkswagen saves a lot of lives. If you drive a Cadillac and you crash with a Volkswagen, the Cadillac will push the Volkswagen back, and the people in Cadillac will be saved. The Volkswagen will die. So the Volkswagen saves a lot of lives too. But Ralph Nader, being Jewish and disliking Germany, he slanted his writing. It was a bestseller, by the way. I just want to know, people tend to slant their writing. So Henry Ford was anti-Jewish. He used to write articles against the Jews all the time. So the Jews asked him to stop doing that. Hi, how are you? Have a seat anywhere on the bed.
Sit here or there.
So Henry Ford used to write very nasty articles about the Jewish people controlling all the banks in the world and all, because he went to a bank operated by Jews and says, I want to build mass production of automobiles. He says, yeah. I want to design cars to mass produce automobiles so they'll be cheaper. And the interest was so high that he got mad at those Jews there. He went to another bank which was owned by Jews and was turned down. Or else he had to borrow money at high interest. So he kept writing these articles against the Jews. Now the Jews, as a people, were picked on by the Gentiles and the Russians. They used to have pogroms in Russia, where they break into a Jewish house, rape the women, and beat up the men. This used to occur every year or every 6 months. So in order for the Jews to survive in Russia, when they noticed the police coming on horses, it was going to be a pogrom. That is where they'd hurt them. So this guy, the Rothschild, you ever hear the Rothschild? He keeps some bread, stale bread, in a certain place, hidden. So when he saw those trucks out there, he'd give the stale bread to his kids and say, stop fighting over it. So when they came and they saw the kids fighting over stale bread. And there's nothing here, and they leave. So the Jews became good, clever at that type of thing, because they could not survive unless they did that. Can you understand that? Okay. I was addressing a bunch of Afro-Americans on the future, and I was telling them that in the future there'll be a moneyless society. This black guy said, I already live in a moneyless society. I don't have any money. So you can understand that the environment you grow up in shapes your behavior to a large extent. If you don't understand that, I don't think any unless you guys are loaded, stop at a certain place and buy the most expensive watch. You buy the watch you can afford. So your taste and your judgment, very few people think of taking a world cruise because it would cost so much. They don't even entertain the idea. If you work in a factory, you don't even think of taking your family out on a world cruise. But if you're successful in business, you might. So a democracy is no good unless people can act on their beliefs. They can't. I try to tell people what a true democracy would be. I don't know if you caught that at the session. The president would criticize a country for 1 hour or an hour and a half. Then when he got through, we would invite the prime minister of that country on there to give his point of view. Then we invite the prime minister of Sweden. Says they're both full of shit. This is how I see it. That's a democracy. Instead of just religion on Sunday, you have the world's religions presented on different stations, and non-religions, and atheism, agnosticism, all points of view, Buddhism, Zen, everything on the air. It's up to the audience. That's a democracy. I've never seen that anywhere. Evidence. Just like a person says, Jesus was wonderful. He was kind to the poor. He prevented people from stoning a girl that had sex before marriage. They'd stone her to death. And Jesus said, he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Well, nobody to it. Because he said a lot of good things, but he did not know how to prevent things. You know, if people don't have food to eat, they steal food. You understand? Or they steal food first, if things are very bad, for their kids, usually. So I'm telling you, the way anybody behaves has to do with their upbringing. If you're brought up by a pastor in the black community, and he's a nice guy, the church becomes a pleasant place for you to go to. But if this guy says, we don't have too much of a congregation today, you say, well, there's the Depression. They can't give 10% of their income to the church. Well, during the Depression, many ministers in America joined the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the Technocracy, all the divergent groups, because they couldn't support the church. And the Technocracy talked about giving all people a piece of the pie. So I joined Technocracy. Did I ever describe that to you? But I joined after the first lecture. The guy said, we want an energy society and divide that energy amongst people. And I thought that was great compared to anything else I heard. So I joined. But I noticed there were no blacks. So I said to Scott, who was the chief engineer, how come there's no blacks? And he said, the blacks, let them start their own community. And on the application I noticed it said race. And that has nothing to do with anything. And I didn't like that. I then noticed about a week later there were no Orientals. I said, how come there's no Orientals? He said, the Oriental mind can't grasp technology. Because when I was a kid, they wore pigtails and a little black hat and the hands in the sleeves and black suits with buttons. They all walked around and always did that. They all looked alike. And Scott took that and said, the Oriental mind can't grasp technology. Today they lead the world in robotics. I argued with him. I tried to turn him around. I could not. So I resigned from Technocracy because there were no blacks and no Orientals. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Now, was it bad? Yes. A lot of technocrats got mad at me. And they think that I'm a technocrat. Some people think I'm a communist. Some people think I'm a fascist. When people confront you with, you want to give everybody something for nothing. When we're born on this earth, we got the whole earth for nothing years ago. And then this guy with his little tribe invaded your tribe that was smaller and took your land away and your women and your food. And that's what a nation is. A nation is a bunch of thieves, better equipped than other thieves. And they take things, resources, or whatever the hell it is. And the more primitive a country, the easier it is to take their resources. When we go to an undeveloped country, we say we'll develop your oil and all that if you give it to us for 50 cents or 20 cents a gallon. They sign that agreement. Well, a primitive country can't develop oil pumping systems. They don't know how. So every country that we or France or England invaded, they used their people in the first group of the army. In other words, when they got mad in another country, they sent the Indians from India to go ahead and beat the hell out of the other guy. We use minorities in America to invade islands. Blacks, Filipinos that are born in America, we use them. First shift on the boat, get off and defend the countries. Then when we get to the South Pacific Islands, we said the Chinese and the Japs are coming over to take your land away from you, and your islands and your houses and your women. And they showed them how to use machine guns, primitives. I'm talking about Polynesians. So when the Polynesians saw the Chinese or Japanese coming, they shot them. It made no difference because they were told a lie. And that's what all soldiers are told. The German soldiers say all Americans are good for is Coca-Cola and cigarettes. That's all I know. And so they looked at Americans and said Coca-Cola and cigarettes. That's why they spoke. And so when Germans read about the Russians putting a Sputnik up there in space, the Germans would say, how can you see what the Russians say they've launched out into space? That's all Russian lies and propaganda. That's what they spoke. They laughed. And we always did that with any country that seemed to advance. And some people today in America believe that we haven't landed on the moon. But if you can go to Cape, you can see the rocket take off. I've seen it come over Venus many times. And you see the astronauts, you see the rocket blasting off, vibrating the air all around. So it's easy to check out. Now, if you still have questions about the Venus project, what if two people want to do the same thing? How do we decide that? So ask me questions now. Because this is, when you leave here, people will ask you questions. Nobody makes decisions, they arrive at them. So everybody doesn't know what that means? They test things based on, if you grow carrots in certain soils, it doesn't produce. And other soils it does. Sugar cane in the south, certain temperature, it produces sugar cane. But if you don't know, you try it, and you arrive at decisions. You don't make decisions. That means, again, in any industry, a warship is built, then they test it. See how fast it'll go. And if it doesn't go fast enough, they put a larger engine in it. How fast does it have to go? Faster than the enemy ship, but not 10 times as fast. Do you know what I mean? But when the enemy comes out with a ship that's faster than an American ship, they bring them all back and put in larger engines. The Army does that, but not with people. Whether unemployed, hungry, deprivation, they don't. They don't send poor kids to college, although there are a few colleges for the poor, but not enough. And the poor kid can't afford to go to college, has to work. Even if it's free, he still needs money, so he works. And when a black guy got a job, if he was trained as an architect, they'd have him clean out the toilets. Do you understand? They used to discriminate on the jobs. They still do. I want you to understand why they do it. Are they bad? No, they're brought up with patriotism. That's the worst thing you can do. This is where Einstein said patriotism is a disease. That's what he meant by it. So If you have questions, please.
I do.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm questioning guys.
That's all right.
I've had a number of conversations about if you build a city and people live there, what that will have in terms of a social impact
Okay.
on society. And one kind of, I guess, the most fun topic
All right.
in that was the likely disappearance of marriage. You know, because
I'm gonna
when
tell you what effect it'll have.
okay,
I think I know what you want
okay,
to know. First of all, no one can move into a new city any more than anyone can get on an aircraft carrier without training and signaling. The airplanes don't land, the deck is bombed. They don't let any sailor without being oriented to an aircraft carrier. In our cities of the future, you go to school and learn about the way that city operates. You go to an access center, you don't fill out any forms, you can access a TV set or anything you want. Why? Because that makes you brighter. And the brighter people are, the richer the society. So people don't move into the city without the word, I hate to use that word, orientation. Don't let that scare you. Orientation only means this is how the city works. If you want water, you go here. If you want television, you go there. The city has no sales, there's no objects no for sale, there's no cigarettes available, there's no junk food available. So if you come into that city and somebody of the old days gives you $500, he can't spend it anywhere. He can't pay you off. So today, if you want to become an airline pilot, they don't take anybody that's suicidal and give him a job as an airline pilot. They do a survey of his background. Then they put him in a dummy plane, see if he can move the controls. Then they put him in a real plane and say, there's fire in the first engine, what do you do? He says, I bank so the fire will burn that way, not against the plane. They teach them every trick they know. But you just don't get in an airplane and become an airline pilot. They put you on an ocean line. You want to be a captain of a ship? They say, what do you do if fire breaks out? You stay with the ship and make sure that the men lower the lifeboats and women and children first, whatever it is that a captain's trained to do. So when people say to me, how do you know people will behave? Well, if on an aircraft carrier, they have as much as 4,000 to 5,000 people, and they all seem to behave in an appropriate way. And if a plane crashes on the deck, they don't leave. They stay there with fire extinguishers. And if it's full of bombs, they get blasted off the deck. They're brought up to defend that land, that aircraft carrier. Well, in the future, everybody you meet will be a person that makes contributions to the world. You either be a doctor, an engineer, a surveyor, food producer, but you won't be a salesman. I got just the car you're looking for. None of that anymore. No more catering to you to get you to buy something. Now, if you got 500 houses on the block, you might have 500 lawnmowers, which is good for the lawnmower business. In a sane society, you have 100 lawnmowers that take care of that whole area. You don't need to buy 500 lawnmowers. Each guy got his own lawnmower. Each person has his own car. What you need is cars in the community center. When you need it, you get in. I don't know if you understand that, but in the Air Force, a guy picks up the phone, he says, this is Captain Hendricks. I'm going to LA in the morning. I'd like the plane on the runway with the prop spinning full of fuel. You only have to say that once. And when he gets there in the morning, that plane is sitting there, and some of the planes are nearly 100,000, 500,000, and $1 million to build. And he gets in that plane, and the guy provides a ladder, takes care of the fuel, makes sure everything is running all right. And when he lands in California, he just gets out. They wheel it into the hangar and update it. Update everything on that plane, service it, so the propeller hums nicely. So everything is kept in key shape. So when you have an automobile in the future, in the early stages, when automobiles were used, you use your car and it'll signal to you and say it's going in for inspection, because it has a tendency to race the engine. And it may be a valve job. And the car will go in and plug itself in electrically. and the valves will be removed automatically. So your car will take care of itself. And a lot of people don't understand that. So how can a car take care of itself?
Chris was asking about marriage in the future.
Well, people will live together because they can relate. If they can't relate, they leave. They don't pay a lawyer $3,000 to effect a separation. And the wife doesn't say, I want the car, the house, and the kids. You understand? Because she has access to finances, house, everything. She doesn't depend on you.
Right.
So if we succeed in getting a Venus Project, say in America, the divorce rate will go way up right away. It's not that people don't like being married. They're trapped. If you got 3 kids and your old man earns 10 times as much as you do, you're going to say, well, you know, I just can't go out with the 3 kids. How am I going to live? So the reason the divorce rate goes up, I'd say that maybe as much as 70% of married people don't agree. They live together sometimes in hatred. And so that isn't good for people.
But that's not only
And then the
because
guy with the white collar that pronounces you man and wife, he has no right to do that. In the Bible it says a couple joined by God cannot be put asunder. That is, if people really love each other and you tell them not to see each other, they're going to see each other. The guy with the white collar can't guarantee that. People do what they have to do. If you don't like your wife, if she's a once a monther and you're a twice a nighter, she's going to say, I don't want to live with you. And that happens in the real world. There are no good or bad people. There are people with different preferences. Now sometimes a normal guy sometimes first comes in less than 30 seconds. His wife says, it takes me 20 minutes. Can't you hold off? He says, well, I can't control it. Just, why don't you come in 20 minutes? See, they're both right. So the wife says, why don't you see a doctor, a psychiatrist, maybe he can tell you. And the psychiatrist say, why do you hate your wife? He says, I don't hate her. I just get so excited I come right away. The psychiatrist says, well, don't you consider her? Why don't you think of something while you're having sex? Think of something else. What's the worst thing you can experience? He says, changing a tire in the wintertime. So think of that when you're making love to your wife. Your erection goes down a little bit. But every time he changes the tire, he gets an erection. You understand? That's called associative memory. I have to speak this way so you'll understand what I'm talking about. Psychiatry will say, why do you hate your wife? You're depriving her of an orgasm. Or why don't you bring her up to a high and then enter if she takes longer? Well, all that's very nice, but the average guy can't do that easily because he's brought up. He doesn't get laid when he's 13 years old because girls are taught not to have sex and men are taught to have it wherever you can. Now, if you're screwing 5 women at the same time, men call you Don Juan. If a girl screws 2 guys, she's a tramp. Who wrote the book to men? They're full of shit. What I'm trying to tell you, women have feelings just as men do. But men make the laws and the rules. And then you look down at a woman that goes out with a lot of guys, but you don't look down at a guy that goes out with a lot of women. You admire him. Say, how do you do that? How do you do so many women? I knew a gangster that used to have lots of women. And I asked him one day, how do you have so many women? Like I had 50 women he was schooling a month. He said, well, there used to be a place called Woolworth's department store. And he used to buy engagement rings for 10 cents apiece. And he'd give it to the girl. And the girl said, I didn't know you loved me that much. So she'd go to bed with him. 10-cent ring. And you say, well, I asked gangsters, because I knew people that worked for Al Capone, how do you maintain honesty in gangs? Because if they're bad people that steal a lot, how do you maintain honesty? Very easy, they said. I leave my wallet on the table with a $5 bill sticking out, and I leave the building. And if it's gone when he gets back, they beat the shit out of the guy that took it. Do you understand? So never fuck with us. Only the people outside, and they're all highly disciplined, unless gangs are broken up and the chief is arrested, then it undergoes variations. Can you understand what I'm saying? They are more disciplinary than the Army. If you're in the drug business, they make goddamn sure you don't smuggle some of the drugs under your seat in the car. So you take advantage of the organization. And the organization has guys that watch you on every move you make before you become qualified. Now they don't do that with the police department. Because I remember black guys in the community used to shoot crap in the streets. And the police car would pull over, the black guys would run away, leaving their money in, and the police would pocket the money. So who are the bad guys? Who are the good guys? They're all full of shit. The whole system. So I never found an organization that was truly Christian-like. I've never met a Christian yet. There might be some out there. A Christian is a guy that will work for so many years, save up so much money, maybe even become a doctor, and go to an undeveloped country and work for nothing to help. That's a real doctor. But if a doctor goes to school to become a doctor because he can make a lot of money as a doctor or a lawyer, that's not the kind of people I'm talking about. So when a person says, if you have no money, what's going to drive a person? Because what drove Martin Luther King? Nobody said, we're going to follow 50,000 in the Swiss bank if you do what we say. He did it because he believed in it. Same with Gandhi. He walked through India. He wore rags, just fabric, no clothing. He was a lawyer. And he said he wanted England to free India. He believed in that. Nobody paid him off. The same with everybody, Jesus, or anybody that did anything for society usually worked for nothing. Louis Pasteur was not a doctor. He was a chemist. He didn't like people being bitten by rabid dogs, and he went to work. Nobody paid him for what he did. Edison worked on the electric lamp. No company came over. The gas company didn't give money to work on an electric lamp. He worked on it. Same with Alexander Graham Bell on the telephone. He was not an electrical engineer. Alexander Graham Bell used to teach the deaf to speak. Did you know that? And he invented his own ways. He had a candle in front of him, and he said, soup, soup, and the deaf would watch the candle move, and then soup, feel the air, and get him to speak, teach him how to speak. And when he learned what speech was, he then accidentally ran into a needle scratching something, and it made a certain sound, like huh, huh, just one sound. Then he had a needle mounted on the thing, and he spoke into a big diaphragm, and it pushed the needle as he spoke up and back. Then he put it on a cylinder, and the cylinder turned. He didn't make that. He bought it, the cylinder. And then when he spoke, it scratched the cylinder while it was turning. But nobody ever sat down and invented a phonograph. You discover little aspects. And he was not, Alexander Graham Bell was not an electrical engineer. And everything new usually comes from outside the establishment. Wouldn't be coming from a person raised in this city with the value system of this city. A new social arrangement will never come. Because that person goes to school, he learns that system, and they make him like everybody else. That's the whole idea of uniformity, so you can control people. You make them uniform. Everybody respects Fresco. I don't want you to. I want you to listen to what I say. If it doesn't make sense, get off. If it makes sense to you, carry on. But don't honor me, because I find it a privilege to help people understand what makes us the way we are. But if you make a statue of me and put it in the parks, it holds people back, because they admire Fresco in the old days that designed these cities that were okay then, but not okay for the future. That's why what bothers me is when I drive by a high school, I see a cannon in front of the school. And I see warplanes in front of libraries, and soldiers on horses, in the parks with guns. Assassins. All of them. And they show movies of a guy getting a medal. Well, to me, they're all bums and assassins. But they don't know any better. It's not their fault. Can you understand? I'm sure even if you're in the army, you don't know that. When I was in the Army, I tried to undo Army men, and I was very successful. Then I noticed I was given basic training in Biloxi, Mississippi. That's the asshole of the world. And I missed the target by 3 feet because I didn't want to go overseas. I had a lot to do socially. And the other guys were hitting the target. They were shipped out in the battle, especially the people that didn't understand that. So I said, gee, I'm going to try to turn people around. And they used to have, in Biloxi, Mississippi, they had 15 sweat boxes. Do you know what that is? That's a tin box up on stilts in all the prisons, the Army prisons. And if a guy didn't behave 3 or 4 times, they put him in a sweat box. It was so hot in the sun that the guy would bang on it and said, I'm going crazy, let me out. And when a guy came out, especially if he was black, a minority, they put him in a sweat box faster. And I saw this black guy come out of the sweat box, fall on his knees and kiss the sergeant's feet and says, don't never put me in that box again, I'll do anything you say. You understand? Torment and torture and prejudice. So I went to see the Catholic priest in the Army. And I said, Father, will you follow me? He said, sure, Sergeant. I was a private. And he followed me, and I said, do you know what those are? He says, yeah, they're sweat boxes. I said, that isn't Christian life. So he said, I don't want to get involved with the military police. And he went back. Then I took a Lutheran priest and brought him out there, and a rabbi. I don't want to get involved with the military police. They were not Christians. They were phonies as far as I'm concerned. They would have protested torment, torture, and even the war. Because in the Bible it says thou shalt not kill. It doesn't say Wednesdays and Saturdays, it's okay. It says thou shalt not kill. And so Christians to me became opportunists and they fell in line with their country. In Italy they blessed the war tanks, the Catholics. And in America they blessed the American war tanks with holy water. You ever see that? So to me they don't know what the hell they are. They're phonies. A phony is a person that says, I believe one thing and does another. Okay? So the society I'm talking about, we have no government. If you have access to anything you need, what do you need a government for? But you do have planners that plan highways, transportation, and how do they plan transportation? A senator once called me and said, Fresco, I didn't realize you're going to work on a highway project. Can you bring the highway a little closer in that direction and then turn off? I said, why? He says, I have 200 acres in that area. And if the highway goes over that way, it increases the value of the acreage. Do you understand what I'm saying? The money system is not good. Even if you got 100 people in government, if 4 are corrupt, that hurts the government. Now, corrupt meaning they take a lot of money for themselves, for their own cause. Well, if their brother manufactures machine guns and they say we have to have defense in this country, and his brother-in-law owns a factory, he can deposit money in the Swiss bank for you. So I'm afraid of the money system. I don't understand when people come over to me and they say, I got just the house you're looking for. Are they doing it for money? Are they trying to help me? Or when a doctor says you need chemotherapy for 3 months, you know, cancer earns a lot of money for hospitals. Used to, when I was a kid, a doctor would come to your house for $3 and he'd ask, how's the family, and get to know you. But today, here's the way the hospitals work. No more than 20 minutes as they come through. The more people that come through, the higher the earning ability. Do you understand that? So when people say, what's the matter with the money system? Nothing's the matter with the money system for the money people. It has a lot to do with the majority of people. So we know now that there's more than enough resources to take care of everybody. And I'm not talking about a monthly stipend so they have just enough to get by. I know a very high standard of living. Why do we do that? Because the higher the standard of living for everybody, the more equipment you got in the house, the better the understanding you have. The higher the earning power, or the higher the production rate, the more you can give to people. But when a depression comes, The factories are still there, but it says no help on it. The steel mills still produce steel, but they're not selling it. So if we go to a resource-based economy, there is no need to have trains and freight yards hoping that next month we'll have a lot of orders and the trains will be used. But if it doesn't happen, they just sit there. The same with automobiles and car lots. Unless it's science fiction, it'll say this is imaginative, it is unreal, you can read it if you want to develop intellectual flexibility. Now that means that one science book that I read years ago, there was a guy that worked in a plant and factory, a limited area. And he says, I still don't know what they're making here. So he hid in a closet. And at night he came out and he went through the whole factory. And they were making human beings. This is science fiction. So he walked over to the chief engineer and said, I now know what you're making here and I'm against it. So the chief engineer went through the files. He said, you were made here. They put an end to that. See, they'll be growing human beings outside of the female in the near future, 20 years from now, for sure. No one wants to walk around pregnant. So that will be in the future. But right now, we think, well, will that be natural? Will that be good? By the time they do that, today you give people shots and hope it's going to work. In the future, you cultivate, I mentioned this, I think, cancer tissue in petri dishes. You know what that means?
Sure.
They're glass dishes with artificial circulation. You keep different types of cancer alive. And what you do is treat the cancer, not the person, until you gain control. For example, the study of medicine today tries to study disease. So they give you a shot, what worked on you doesn't work on him. You know, so in the future, medicine will have a different direction. I hope you can remember this, the direction I tell you. What they'll do is work with a living substance, cells, and learn to control the speed of multiplication, slow them up, gain control of living substances, different kinds of antibodies. And if he has resistance to cancer, they'll cultivate your antibodies, lots of them, and give them to people that don't have those antibodies. Then later, they'll design an organism, a little organ in your body, with all types of cells that can quickly adapt to any condition, just like Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, to adjust to any condition. That's where medicine's going, not experimenting, giving the guy a shot and hope he gets well, or do a lot of research in chemistry. Doctors don't even know what the problem is today. Otherwise they protest automobiles going through the streets. Now this place is going to have, I'd say in 20 years, so much respiratory problems, it'd be unbelievable. Most of the people today alive will be dead. But they don't do anything until 4 kids are hit by a car, they put up a traffic light, because they have limited funds. But when the whole world owns all the resources, there's no more nickels and dimes for research. We say to you, what would you like in your lab? You say, well, I like an electron microscope. Can you use 2? Yes, that'd be great. We give them 2, because the stuff out there exists to make all the electron microscopes you want. But the corporation that makes it makes $4,000 on each small electron microscope. But if the public owned the earth and everything on it, there's no more price tags. The question is not how much will a new city cost, do we have the resources? Now, I don't know if you know this, the United States went to war with Germany, Japan, and Spain, mainly in Italy, because they were in the middle of a recession. And it was the war that pulled us out. Every company got contracts for cars, machine guns, bullets, eyeglasses, artificial legs, crutches. You understand? War was big business. It made millionaires of most people. And if we didn't get into World War II, the country would have gone socialist or communist. So I would say that it is conditions that exist that reduces where the public will be. As long as the public's working, has jobs, they don't concern themselves with social conditions. But if you're married and your wife gets a cancer, breast cancer, if she lives, say, 5 years, you'd be broke. no matter how much money you got. There's no security. So the Army thinks there is security, so they build an Air Force, and they build computerized systems, and they build submarines which cost over $1 billion apiece. But the United States now has sonar all over the world, under the water of all the world's oceans, so we know where every Russian submarine is. We know exactly where they're at. So they think that's good. But if China knows where the hell it's going, it will invest in computer detection systems and jamming systems. Because all military systems today depend on computers. So if you learn to jam them, you can knock out the Navy, the Air Force, aircraft carriers, and you don't have to build 1,000 airplanes a month. Do you understand? But the trouble with nuclear war, it'll be over in 3 days. You don't get a chance to make any money at it. Whereas ordinary war might go on for 10 years. There's a hell of a lot of money in new machine guns, and every year you have to replace stuff. But you don't with cars. You don't pull all the cars in and put sensors on them so they can't hit each other. Nobody gives a shit about you. But in military systems, they do. So do you understand? When I say that nations are inherently corrupt, I mean the nature of the operation. Now, if you got to the South Seas years ago, I don't know about today. They were very corrupt. They had a resource-based economy. But I don't know if I've answered your question. I may not have.
To a degree, but I mean, like, so what you're so
Children are
what I'm
raised
trying, so they're basically all children will be raised. They're basically these scientists.
to understand the earth right. There is no other profession. Let me say, if you become an auto mechanic, you study the science of power transmission. If you become an electrical, you have to study that. Everything you have in the world today is technical. Your watch is technical. But if a guy is a businessman, he gives you the business. He doesn't do anything for society. If a guy stands behind the counter all day, say he sells watches, what can I do for you? What can I show you? He doesn't do anything. It's the Swiss that make the watch, the Swiss engineers. So everything you have that I know is technical. Your eyeglasses, your false teeth, your jock strap, your shoes are all made part of technology. Now, I don't know what politicians can do. I just don't know what they do. I don't know what a businessman does. I don't know what an investment broker does. If he invests in certain, he studies the stock market and growth curves. And he talks to a lot of people. They say, yes, the new cameras don't have film, and they're going to sell, so invest in them. He doesn't know what to do. He has technical advisors that say, what should I invest in? What computer company? Which one? Apple. Apple keeps at the forefront of technology. But if a new computer comes up with a chip 1/4 the size, 10 times as fast as Apple, Apple can't sell their stuff, their production machinery, because it's designed for certain types of chips. But here's what Apple can do. It can buy your company or buy your patents and not produce it until 3 years from now.
Can I throw in something?
Yes.
Okay. This is my question. Oh, okay. So, can we, for my question,
That's all right.
can we completely set aside our current circumstance and only think within the frame of resource-based economy?
Sure.
A
The
Venus
after
Project
it's
type
built.
city, right?
Okay.
Completely
Transition.
no
Okay.
commentary on
Right, very
what's
good.
happening today.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the Venus Project
Yeah.
city, you have a situation where this city wants to connect to this city
They're all
via
connected.
via the high-speed maglev
Okay.
train.
Yes.
It's not connected yet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You're short 10 physicists. In order to do that, here you need these people
I
with
answer
this
your
technical.
It takes 7,000 technicians a day to operate everything on Earth.
Mhm.
So we have more than enough.
Okay.
We already did that survey.
So
Do we
yeah.
have, for example, if you have
Sure.
today 50 or 100 aeronautical engineers, they can design all the airplanes you need. It doesn't take million engineers, or it doesn't take, today it may take 3,000 people in an automobile factory. But the automobile factories that I know of today lift up the car automatically. They carry a whole frame of car up on the ceiling, and when it comes down, the machine puts the wheels on, and there's less people there. There's a supervisor that watches the instruments, but they can put a machine there later to watch the instrument, scan it. But right now, if you go to a supermarket, you'll see certain counters where you run a card by, and there's no cashier adding up your product. They go by a counter automatically, and you put your card through it. Well, that means, like there used to be thousands of women operated elevators. Today, I don't see any women in elevators. I don't see, in any modern factory, I don't know if you ever watch a Coke factory, there's a million nipples that fill Coke bottles as they go by. No human can do that fast. Even if you wanted to, you could grab a bucket and pour it in each Coke bottle. You can't do it. Then the Coke bottles are stacked, sealed, and shipped by people. That's only until they standardize packaging, meaning unfortunately supermarkets today have packaging and all the packages are different sizes. That makes it difficult. And then when you get through unpacking, the packaging is a nuisance. You have to take it out and dump it. All the packaging in a resource-based economy will be soil nutrients that dissolve in 2 years and add to the soil. So all packaging in the future has to be recycled. You understand what I'm saying? Now, if you take that bottle there, if you put hot stuff in it, it outgasses into the stuff. Some plastic materials are poisonous. Eventually, not right away. 20 years drinking from polyethylene bottle will hurt you. I just read an article in today's paper, I got it there, that many people in a certain part of this area are suffering from mercury. They're loaded with mercury. The fish, you can't keep dumping things into the ocean without the fish becoming poisoned. And everybody on Earth, including the polar bears, have toxic materials in their body. All of them. No. What does that mean for the future? I don't know. The toughest job for the Venus Project is cleaning up this mess made by the monetary system. Why do they dump stuff in the ocean? Because you hear of oil spills, and that makes a headline. Oil spill, damage the shores of a certain area. But this is what the public doesn't know, that all ships clean their bilge out. You know, the bilge at the bottom of the ship of oil or, and there's much more pollution from that than all the oil spills around. Did you know that? Just a normal right to dump that. So nations have worked out a system that 15 or 12 miles out from your land is your fishing grounds. I don't know if you know that. There are agreements, marine agreements, that you can't fish in waters off the Philippines, because that belongs to the Philippines. But they do pay off Philippine politicians, Japanese, have the right to fish in that area, so they pay them off. And in the money system, it's very hard to make agreements with other nations and keep those agreements. I don't know of any agreement that wasn't violated. Now you can get the congressional record. Don't take my word for it. You'll see all the violations by us and other people.
Jack,
Yes.
if human beings choose to become a resource-based economy,
Yes.
is this possible I guess my question is during the transition period. If when we decide to transition from this economy to the resource economy, can this work in part of the world, or the
Yes.
whole
Only
world have
work
to
in a
change at the
certain
same
part
time?
of the world. The economy that was powerful, that falls, the headlines today said that China is due for a lot of problems economically, and probably in the next few years. But anyway, if China falls, they'll have a revolution there. It'll either become a dictatorship of the military, or it'll be social change towards some branch of socialism, economy, not a resource-based economy. We hope to approach different countries, showing that if we pool our resources, if you're a big country and I'm a big country, and we both don't have to build navies, if we agree to share our resources, it's cheaper than maintaining a large army, navy, air force, airplanes, and we're all threats to each other. But if I say if we share resources, if I put that to you and you say, yeah, but will he share resources? So we have an international meeting and we say you've got a lot of resources but no engineers. He's got a lot of engineers but no resources. So we put the engineers in your area to develop resources for everybody. And the resources go much further because nobody owns a bicycle. There are hundreds of bicycles in the countryside where you just use them. You know, you bring them back and leave them wherever you get off, so other people can use them. Otherwise, you got millions of bicycles sitting around doing nothing. You got garages, in your garage you got a bicycle hanging up. You got a lathe or a drill press or a lawnmower, which isn't used every day by you, and the guy next door has the same shit. If we use a resource-based economy, we'd make more things available to people, because you don't own anything, if you know what that means. You can access it at the resource center. It's cheaper to make lawnmowers and put them in the access center than every house having a lawnmower. When you need it, you check it out in your district. And you can have a lawnmower that'll mow your lawn without you sitting on it. I think you know that today. You had a question?
Chuck, yeah. Also, another transition question.
Trouble. The transition will be trouble.
Well, if it, you said it's not going to be everywhere, of course it'll
No.
grow.
Yeah.
But so if it is somewhere and these people are enjoying a high level of life, as is the ideal, what about defense? I mean, there
Okay.
will be others that want that, and
Yeah.
to intellectually.
That's all transitional until the world joins together. Once you open your city and say, you're welcome, France, to come and look at our system, and if the standard of living is higher than any other system, the French people will demand it. So we don't hope to go into any country and twist that wrist, to join us, to come in with armies and bring democracy. You are welcome to come and visit any of our cities. You'll see the sense of it very quickly. And you'd have to be super primitive tribes of the Amazon that you wouldn't want to join us. Now I can tell you this about tribes up the Amazon. They still build rafts the same way they did 1,000 years ago. No change, because there's no need for change. The animals were there, the food was there, they're growing on trees. The shark was the same for billions of years, not much change. Because the ocean used to be a constant environment, you know what I mean? But when people live up north or in the tropics, you can't put a fish in your hut and leave it there for 2 days. It spoils. But if a guy lives in an area with a lot of salt and he happened to put it on a salt pan and the fish lasts 6 days, and they used to use salt, salting foods. Then they use peppers and things like that to preserve food. So if you live in an area where there's climatic change, it gets hot, it gets cold, you got to skin animals, develop clothing, then you develop a heater. Do you know what I mean? If conditions are fairly constant, like the South Pacific, you don't need clothes. And fruit and coconuts grow on trees, and the ocean's full of fish. There's not much social evolution because the conditions there do not generate need for change. But if you people that live up north had to make boats with thicker hulls for the ice, you know, they had to invent things. In other words, during the war there's a lot of inventions, destructive inventions. You know, now today in electronics there's a lot of inventions. So the Japanese say that the life of in a store today is 6 months of electronic equipment, and then something new comes out. And the nation that doesn't change its stuff, updates fast, I will have no doubt that if Japan continues the way they're continuing, they will control high tech in the future. They're moving faster than other nations. Is it because they're Japanese? No. Because they're in a competitive world, and they realize the Americans would like to invent something new, then they'd like to run it for 4 or 5 years to amortize the investment. If you put in $20 million to make a certain type of computer, you don't want to change it every year. You want to let it run as long as it can. But there are other countries, and some countries, like China, will take the cell phone and copy it. Why should they fight? Why should they buy patents? They don't have to. So they'll copy whatever, and China will pass nations that sell cell phones. Do you understand that? Yes.
Let's say a certain area or country, everybody agrees to move to a resource-based economy. Let's say they all agree today. What would be the first 3 steps in that direction, but while feeding the people as well during that?
Well, let's assume that Brazil, that's the first thing I'm saying, let's build the city that Fresco has in mind. The research center is a planning center that is not designed yet for people. The research center sends out the surveys of all the world's resources to find out what we have. Otherwise we can't design anything. So we have to find out what we lack. We lack drinking water now. So the first project would be to extrude food. You know what that means? We will extrude bread with all the vitamins in it that people need to survive. And then when it's extruded, it'll be sucked down to the smallest possible dimension and hermetically sealed. Then it doesn't need refrigeration. If you take vegetables, dehydrate them, and place them in cans, 1 can the size of that will feed 500 people. Whereas canning each soup can is inefficient. You got water in it. But if you dehydrate food and study its effect on animal health, and then dehydrate, you can store billions of tons of food dehydrated. So the first thing will be studies at the planning center in dehydration, food, nutrition, because those are the things needed first. We want to feed people that are starving during the transition. And we will do the planning first and tell people why they can't live in these cities, the planner. Then the planners will plan the next city and the third city. Say Argentina wants to build it. Say Russia wants to build 2 of them and try them out. They are welcome to come to our cities and learn about it, live there, see if they like it. And if they do like it, which I think they will, because there's no restrictions, very little restrictions, they can't hurt another person. If you do that, you're sent in for corrective behavior. But when we say correctional institute, it does nothing for criminals. You know what I mean? They call them correctional centers. They don't correct criminals. Ours do. The reason we do, because we know that a criminal is made by culture. You're not necessarily a bad guy. A criminal may even help an old lady across the street. What I don't like about that is a criminal doesn't say, gee, what do I do now that she got across the street? How does she live? Where does she live? How does she go shopping when she becomes decrepit and can hardly walk? There are a lot of older people in the future will be assigned jobs in old folks' homes or children's centers because they like to be with children or work with animals. But you will pick what you want to do. But most people in the future will be multidisciplinarians, so they can work in any area. And any area they work in will help people. No, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I guess that answered my question. Another point is, will there still be money to a certain extent during the transition?
Yeah, there'll be trouble in the money areas. And there'll be prisons in the money areas. And when things get bad, there'll be more prisons, and more prisons cost money. And they'll be letting the prisoners out because they can't afford it. And decreasing the size of the armies and navies because they have to tax people to maintain soldiers. You understand that? So a country that is overtaxed cuts down on armies, but they work on missiles because the army would invade an area, but it costs too much to pay each soldier, so they do guided missiles. So the missiles are guided by one man will guide a machine that launches 50 missiles. You understand what I mean? A soldier with a machine gun today, in the old days when it had a revolution in Russia, some soldiers had rifles, one bullet at a time. And the public came with their bats and roots and fought with rakes and shovels. The revolution was possible. Now one soldier with a laser machine gun can hold off 1,000 people. So it's going to be tougher, the transition, because they will use soldiers to try to check. And I'm talking about the minorities are going to be the first to rise up. And when the minorities get angry, they really don't know what to do. When the Afro-Americans were mistreated in LA, and people got mad when they mistreated a black or shot a guy for no reason at all. They threw Molotov cocktails in dry goods stores, shopping centers. That's the wrong thing to do. What they should have done is the transmission lines that transmit high voltage, just break one of the legs. If it falls over, all electricity goes off from LA to San Francisco. They don't know what to do. The blacks get angry, they'll throw a fucking Molotov cocktail in any store. And that's not what you do. The blacks don't know how to be revolutionary. Now what you do if you really want to be revolutionary, you buy gasoline trucks or you rent them. And you pump out all the gasoline, put nerve gas in it. And every time there's a Ku Klux Klan meeting at the Shrine Auditorium, you put it in the ventilating system. You understand what I'm saying? They don't fight that way. They don't know how. And so the downtrodden don't know how to be revolutionary in a revolutionary age.
I think you need to visit your correctional
Well,
facility.
I'm not advocating it. I'm telling you, I would rather educate people to a resource-based economy than kill people. I understand revolution. I understand why it occurs. Am I mad at them? I'm not mad at anybody. I'm not mad at the capitalist, the soldier. They just don't know how to solve problems. I think it's easy to go to any country and say if we share resources, don't have to maintain an army. You get American ingenuity. We got your waterfalls we will use to generate power. And I don't know if you know this, but super low temperatures, you can conduct electricity with no loss, no power loss. So a lot of research will be done in that area. A lot of research, meaning every research lab in America, I can't talk about other countries, wants grants, money. Without it, they can't do research. We give them whatever the hell they need, and right away you've enhanced the world. You know, there's many different approaches to medicine. There's natural cures, and then there's medicine. Now, I told you, I think I told some of you, if the drug companies found out that celery juice can lower blood pressure, they're not going to put that in their publications. Our pills cost $2 a piece. You drink a glass of celery juice every 2 days, your blood pressure go down. It's not to the advantage of that company to do that. It's not the advantage of the gasoline company to push electric cars. You understand that, don't you? And they have more power than the electric companies have, apparently. But the battery is a big thing to carry in a car. And the engineers tell us, the electrical engineers, the battery is a lousy way to solve problems. The future will be what they call supercapacitors. They're little tiny units about this size that have the power of a big battery. And the cars equipped with that can take off fast and shall be charged in just a few minutes rather than overnight. So when the electric cars come out, there'll be more research done in supercapacitors. But right now, the electronic engineers don't control companies. They work for companies. And if you pay them a fairly good salary, but not enough to start their own company. If you pay your help, if I paid my help, say if I had a factory, $3,000 a week, I'm a hell of a nice guy. They're going to take their family out on a cruise. I won't see them Monday morning. Do you understand that? So you pay your help the minimum wage. They have to come back Monday if they want to pay their rent or get food. So minimum wage is not a nothing thing. It's well worked out. So the lower the wage, the more dependents they have to come back. If I paid my help $10,000 a week, they'd buy an airplane, fly to France. I'd never see them again. So minimum wage is engineered for the stability of a certain company. Why do we outsource to China? Because our earning capacity goes up. If it cost me $50 or $100 to make a refrigerator, if I have it made in China, it costs $25. I can sell, I can beat your company. Do you understand? If you produce them in America. So all the countries are cutting each other's throats, really. They are doing that. So China might be at the lead now, but Spain may be there tomorrow. The company that's falling apart has to come up with new ideas or they die entirely. Do you understand that? See if you can think of other negatives, yes.
Back on the transition thing, I'm curious if we did decide to go to that and we do the research, like what kind of time frame do you think? How long would it take before people would be allowed to move into cities?
Well, they asked the same question when we went to war with Germany, Spain, Italy, and the Axis powers, all the Axis powers. Here's what they found. They had to get boys from America that go to church and had to get them to kill. And they asked, how long would it take to take a kid from church to get him to kill? And Frank Capra said 3 months. Now, here's what he did. I think I mentioned that before. You take Chinese Americans and put crooked teeth in them to make them look bad. False teeth, they just stick out. Buck teeth. And you have them gang rape a girl, then cut her open, especially if she's pregnant, cut her open. And you make movies to develop hatred, to show bonsai, just people killing each other. Japanese cutting an American to pieces, or gang raping a girl, or blacks gang raping. Whatever it is you want to develop, Frank Capra knows what to do. Now he's opportunist, of course. I would never make pictures like that, even though there was a lot of money in it. I wouldn't make any pictures like that, because that doesn't solve problems. It merely delays them. And if you come to understand that, there's no system in a monetary system that can make it decent.
So he took kids and changed them within 3 months. So if you had access to televisions and media, you could change people's values within about
Very
3 months.
quick. That's what Frank Capra found. That's what the Army found. That the Army endorsed certain films and gave the film companies money to make films called Why We Fight. But the trouble the Army had came later. I think I told somebody with a certain type of bird in the South Pacific Islands. It's called a miner bird. You ever hear of it? It's like a parrot. And the bird used to repeat what the Japanese used to say, "Yankee, come out and fight." The birds would say that to trees and shoot them. They wasted a lot of ammunition on the miner birds. So the Army didn't detect that till later. Now, if the Japanese or the Chinese come out with computer jamming systems, if they spent all their money instead of on weapon systems, guided missiles, computer jamming, lots of money, billions, they can jam our computers and fuck up our Army, Navy, Air Force, and everything. Yes,
Question?
yes,
Since we're talking about movies,
yes.
in our monetary system, that's the business in which I'm currently involved.
Good.
Okay? Now, since you've thrown advertising into the group of disciplines that will become extinct, I've been thinking about this quite a lot.
That's
See?
right.
And I have a thought, and I want to run it by you. Okay? In a resource-based economy, in a new city, let's say these two gentlemen, they each make movies. Okay? Now, of course, it doesn't cost anything to go see the movies. They're free.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Now,
Oh, wait a while. Do you mean to make a movie?
he
You build
goes
a
to
set.
see a movie.
Yeah.
So the people in the city are free to go see
Yeah.
the movie. Now, let's say they're rivals, these two. Okay?
During a transition.
No. Just life in general. Okay?
Yeah, right.
And they're both very proud of the movies they've made,
Yes.
and they want just purely on a matter of pride. Okay? They want the most people to come see their particular movie, even though it's free. Now, they both happen to know that I worked on Spider-Man,
Yeah.
And I know that in Japan, the #1 movie-going demographic is young
You
women.
know the type of stuff they want to see.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we changed the posters
Yeah.
for Spider-Man to put. If you look at the American poster, it's all this.
Yeah.
Right? But if you look at the Japanese poster, there's Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire
different
embracing
Yes.
in front of this.
Yes.
Okay? And that attracts the #1 movie-going demographic to see the movie. Now, he comes to me and he says, "Hey, can you help me let people know in the city
I think
about
your
my
question
movie?"
is who decides what movies are made and how. What about competitive systems in movies? Would that be permitted? Would there still be envy and jealousy of movies? You want to know how the movie industry. Here's how it's run. There are movie studios all over every city. If you want to make a movie, you can go in and make it. It's run in your city. If the people like it, it travels all around. If they don't like it, you don't make it. But if you're female, you don't have to go to bed with a producer or director. Do you understand? You can make any movie you want to make. Everybody has the right to make movies. Now, I don't know if you know this, computers have done away with set builders. Today they used to spend $500,000 on a set for Ben-Hur. Today the computer generates the set with thousands of people waving, and there's only 2 people in it. So what happens? People make movies, and if the public likes it, they are used. If they don't like it, you go back and make another movie. You don't come to an end financially, and you're not honored by your movie. If you make a movie that changes people faster than his movie, your system is used until somebody comes up with a faster system for changing people. But you get no rewards. Your reward is the end of war, poverty, hunger in the world. If you don't see that as a reward, you wouldn't want to live in our system.
So
I think
that
his
wasn't-
question is how are they marketed?
No. My question. Can I ask my question?
Yeah, please.
My question is, since I'm in the advertising industry
Today,
today,
Yeah.
and in this society, if he comes to me, what's your name?
Derek.
Derek comes to me and he says, "Hey, Chris, I know that you know how to communicate this to people. Okay, would there not be creative advertising in the new
why-
cities?"
no, there's no advertising. There's information. Like on the corner of your television set, it says there's going to be an exhibit in building 25D. It'll help you. Even though that exhibit appears to be unfamiliar, it'll help you because it knows enough about you to know you'd be interested in that. So it really tells, like for example, if you say, stop cutting down the forest. I don't know if I told you about the window screen in front of your TV set, did I? You pull it down, or it goes down automatically, and the news of the day is printed on it by the TV set. Then you take it off and read it, and then you hang it back up, and infrared erases the news. So you got a newspaper every morning, no newsboys, no cutting down the forest, no garbage paper, has to be recycled. Do you understand that? All right, now see if you follow this. With 6 laser beams, weak can print inside a book at the focal point and update books on medicine, so you don't get a journal every month of what's new in medicine. Unless you press hold, you want to keep that information. There'll be another book that'll be updated automatically in your home by teleprinting, meaning the beams are focused in and they move apart, and that'll print on all the pages throughout the books. In other words, remember that today embalming is big business, and they have to. It's a law, put embalming fluid in each person. They pump your blood out and pump embalming fluid in, unless your religion forbids it. But I mentioned before that all the reservoirs of all the major cities have a high percentage of embalming fluid in it. You can't keep putting fluid in people, burying them, and the fluid goes down to the water table eventually. So will they be embalmed in the future? No. Most people during the transition will leave body parts to other people. But the worms are going to eat you if you don't. We show that in movies. We show worms eating people. We show the guy now wants to be buried whole. You know, he thinks he stays there. Rest in peace, it says on the grave. What bullshit? You don't rest in peace.
I think Derek's got a question.
On the subject of entertainment, what if there is a particular event, like such as maybe the Olympics or some great theater event, somebody singing or what have you? Very popular, many people want to go, but there are not enough seats. How do you rectify that?
How do you?
Like if there are, let's say, in a stadium, 10,000 seats or 50,000 seats,
Yeah.
but 1 million people want to go to see this event.
Okay. When you do a survey of how many people attend motion pictures today, as they did 35 years ago, when motion pictures were popular, today they have television sets. You don't have to get out in the rain or sit in a theater for an hour and a half while you can watch it on your TV set. The movie industry has cut back considerably. So what we do is surveys. The surveys are automatic. When you turn on your TV, we know people are watching it. If they're not turned on, they're doing something else. That something else determines how big a concert hall you build in different areas, by what people want, not what I want. In other words, the aircraft carriers are very important to the Navy, and it's one torpedo can sink an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carriers have 16 inches of metal below the waterline. That's a hell of a lot of metal. That's like 6 million refrigerators. So they have escort destroyers outside the range of the aircraft carriers, half a mile away, to ward off torpedoes coming toward the aircraft carriers. Then they have airplanes flying over the aircraft carriers, so if any enemy planes come. So they try to compensate for that. The only difference is that is war. We use the same system in human need. If popular music, say, since we encourage people to be radically different, everybody, we try to emphasize what you call individuality. If hip-hop is the in thing now, and Fresco doesn't like hip-hop, he doesn't attend, but the younger kids attend. But if you've got a changing society with changing musical instruments, the goddamn drum is still the same. The saxophone is the same. I don't know if you know this, but way back, like 150 years ago, a horn was 20 feet long. And they have a horn carrier at the other end, and the guy would blow the horn. And a guy carrying a rope suggested that they turn the horn around and make it shorter. Do you know what I mean by that? So you blew here, and it came out here. That's why the horn is turned around. It used to be straight out. In the days of King Arthur, when you turn around, you knock 3 people over. So today they wind up the horn, they bend the saxophone, more so. But in the future, there'll be musical engineering. That's a whole new field. The trouble with music, now this is harder to sell, is that music is made by known instruments. Until the phonograph record was invented, it could make the sound of a piano. But electronics, a little speaker, can make the sound of a human voice, electronics, a violin, anything. And it's getting better every year, more accurate. So you don't need a violin. When I was a kid, they used to have a band sitting in front of a merry-go-round, and the band would play. Then when I was about 10 years old, all merry-go-rounds had a dummy band, mechanical. Do you ever see that? They played drums and musical instruments like compressed air. It cost too much to pay a band. Did you ever see that? Now merry-go-rounds have a disc, a little tiny disc. They play that, sound like a symphony. And that did away with a lot of musicians. So in the future they're going to say, why is it that people like music? What is music that makes people want to hear it? And they'll begin to study sound and its effect on the human body. If certain sounds cause you to relax, they will arrange sounds in a way that pleases the nervous system. Today they have drums and all, and some people hate hard rock. In fact, they did experiments, I don't know if you know this, with classical music and plants. and they played classical music, and the plants grew better. With hard rock, they died. Now, does it mean that hard rock is bad for humans? Not necessarily. So the point is, how do you know what an experiment is? How do you know whether experiments are valid or trying to preserve a certain institution? So we train people in sound engineering to study the effects of sound on the human body, and they have nothing to gain. They don't make more money, they live very well. And also, we try to get this across to millionaires today. However you live, you will live far better in a resource-based economy. They say, can you prove that? You show them if the world's resources are used to enhance the mind and body and everything around you. You know, if you're a multi-millionaire out on your yacht, pirates can sink your fucking little yacht. You understand that? And if you're a multi-millionaire, during the last depression, most millionaires had all their yachts steamed up in New York, ready to blow town. Did you know that? If the revolution occurred. But they elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he built transit camps, CC camps. I don't know if you know what these things are. He built places for kids to go to get jobs, and they were rebuilding the forest. And CC camp, you earned $60 a month for working just 3 hours a day. And the artists that were unemployed, always unemployed. But during the Depression, there was a lot of unemployed artists, so they built art studios where you can access art material free of charge. And you got $60 a month free, and you paint and oil all free, and artists were painting to beat the band. Then you had unemployed actors, and they were writing plays, Waiting for Lefty, liberal plays, and they were producing plays, and the producers got $60 a month, the unemployed. The unemployed psychologists ran the transit camps. The transit camps for wild boys of the road. Kids, instead of sleeping in the park with their parents, were riding freight trains all across the country. Thousands of them. They were called wild boys of the road. So to prevent revolution, Roosevelt did this. Had he not done those things, there would have been physical revolution in the country. He saved the country. The rich people hated them because he taxed them heavily to maintain these CC camps and all that. So I want you to know what happened. If it wasn't for Roosevelt, I don't say Roosevelt was a nice guy. He prevented the revolution in America. And the yachts did not leave the country. But today, if a lot of yachts left the country, there'd be a hell of a lot of pirates from the West Indies. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Yes.
There are a lot of advances in humanoid robotics right now, and soon, I guess, when we have humanoid robots are kind of become common, I see it as, wouldn't it really accelerate this progress towards resource-based, towards the resource-based economy? I mean, I see it inevitable if humanoid robots.
I couldn't hear every word you said. Can you tell me what a question is?
We have humanoid robotics today, and do you think that that will accelerate the process towards a resource-based
No,
economy?
because the thoughts about a robot are not correct. You see, they show in movies, they show some robots flying an airplane. You don't want a robot, you want controls that move automatically. You don't need a guy there working the controls. If you go to a coffee company that's automated, you put a nickel or 50 cents in the machine and you select what coffee you want. You press the button and it makes different types of coffee. Doesn't it? I mean, that exists today. Well, that's the same with the future. You don't have a robot standing there boiling coffee and taking the coffee. That's in the movies. That gave people the wrong idea. You don't want a robot walking here and says, what would you like for breakfast? You want a machine to produce what you like on the table you're at. You don't need a robot bringing you the fucking coffee or pushing vacuum cleaner. It's all ass backwards. That's normal people, Hollywood. They call them Hollywood hacks. that know nothing about the future. That's why all your spaceships look good, but the people in them are the same kind of people you have today. They use laser weapons, blow up spaceships. They don't take into account that people must change to attain that future. You can't attain a high civilization without education. So it's to our disadvantage to educate people. I don't know if you know this. If you taught slaves how to read, you were fined in the old days. Did you know that? Because the minute the slave starts reading, he says, "What is this shit?" You know what I mean? So if you keep them back, ignorant, lack of knowledge, then you're in trouble with them. But if people start organizing people in labor unions and all, that's a threat to industry. So they did hire gangsters to visit the head of the union, say, "Listen, get off that strike, or we'll blow the shit out of you or your family." So sometimes labor union leaders submitted to that. They had to. So gangsters really got final control of unions. And so that's all because there's money in it. If you do away with the money system, I see many different things disappearing. No girl will marry a guy because he's rich, because she has the same access to resources. And no guy marries a girl because she's rich. And no lawyer tries to sue a rich man because he's rich, because that doesn't exist anymore. If you don't do away with those things, you can then pass laws. They don't work. Say no to drugs, that's a stupid law. There are more drug sales than ever. I think it was President Reagan's wife that wrote that, say no to drugs. In the Army, it said, "Please aim when you're pissing." Try to get in the urine. And it says, signs like that. There's a target in there. Then there's another sign I saw that worked better. It says, "You've tried the floor, now try the urinal." Have you ever seen that? Because men piss all over the place.
We need those here.
But certain signs seem to work, and people, do those things. But during the war, they had a picture of Mussolini in the urinal. Did you know that? And in Jewish communities, they had toilet paper with Adolf Hitler printed. That sold more than ordinary. And you guys have never seen that?
No.
See, I'm older than you, so I've seen a lot of that. And I know what they mean by that. But did you ever see that, Roxanne?
No, how about the one that don't put the cigarettes in the urinal, they get soggy and hard to light.
Yeah, that's another thing. Did you hear that one? Did you ever see that sign? But that worked in the Army for a while, but then they pissed for it. And so you run into problems. Have safe sex and all that. In the future, you can't have unsafe sex because everybody's given a physical and everybody is being treated. Today, if you don't have the money, by the way, they cut back on age. Did you know that? And it's growing like mad through Africa, India. They cut back on financing. So we are a very cruel society, but you won't know it until we get to the future when your children come up to you and say, "Daddy, couldn't you see how obvious a money society was? How basically you couldn't make laws to stop crime because our prisons are filled in the United States. We have more prisoners than any other country." Isn't that amazing? And we can't see it. They did a hell of a good job on us, to enable us not to see these things.
On your question, I know the part about humanoid robots, but you also mentioned that regardless of whatever the robot is, whether it looks like a human or it does not, the robots, the machines, will begin to take more and more jobs of human beings because they can do the job.
True?
They don't need bathroom
Is that
breaks.
true?
They don't need insurance.
What will
things
people
like
do?
that.
Is that your question?
Well, your point it was
Will the
that
robots
what-
take over the management?
no,
No,
not that,
they're-
because robots only do what they're programmed to do.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that accelerate
Yes,
people going
yes.
towards the Venus project
Yes.
because they have no jobs, because it would force society to
Yeah.
go towards the
Only if
more.
there's enough information out there about the Venus Project, and that's where all of you come in. Otherwise, they'll go back and do the same systems that they had before. But the more technology reduces labor, then people won't have the purchasing power to buy the goods turned out, and that's the end of the system.
There's no matter what.
But
you
it
do,
doesn't
there's
mean they'll go
something.
to a resource-based economy unless we have movies out there and information that they
Makes it
understand,
easier.
and they want to do that, and they work towards it.
The only reason for the transition is to make it easier for people. But the transition will be terribly painful if they don't know about the Venus Project. It'll happen or we'll kill each other. The probability is we'll develop nuclear weapons and kill each other. I see it as highly improbable unless we can get to the media. And if we can get to the media, what you're supposed to do when you leave here is call universities and say, I'd like you to present the Venus Project. I've heard the military people. Now I'd like to hear the average Japanese person on the air and other people, other than military people. All you got in the States on NBC, CBS is military people and politicians. You don't have sociologists, social scientists talking against the war. They don't get on the air.
Or
There's a
talk to
government-
other people about it. You know, the more people we have who
Press
know
it.
about it, the better it'll be.
Press radio stations tell them put the Venus Project.
Because you never know who you run across or who you meet. It just takes one person to get certain things done.
The most important thing is to get to the wealthy people and say you will live better than you live today. We can assert that, yes.
Yeah.
I know.
You can't take addendum and just bring it over here because Japanese people don't really care about Christianity and or the Fed or all of that.
Let's say this, they don't know how to.
Well, okay.
Let me tell you what the British did, so you might be interested in this. They were fighting hundreds of nomads on the desert, Arabs, and this is World War One. They flew one airplane and projected an image of Mohammed on the clouds. And the Arabs laid down on the clouds with their guns and all, and they took over. Now it's easy today with stereoscopic movies to have Jesus ascend from the clouds. If you know how, I know how to do that. You don't understand what I'm talking. Clouds, you can project long-range projectors, you can project airplanes, anything you want up there. Now,
I'd be
people are
interested.
ignorant. People are malleable today. They're not sharp. Oh, a few technicians will know what's happening. But if you want to control the majority of people, they're always controlled. When first says, doesn't your system control people? Yes, it does. But all systems do. When you have a boy, you tell him he's a Frenchman. This is France. Look at the Eiffel Tower. That's a symbol of France. In Germany, you are German and proud of it. Everybody controls people.
But it's about Zeitgeist Addendum. It might be a Peter Joseph's research, but at the last part of the movie says he mentions J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and several other banks. Why specific to that bank? Like the
No,
do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think he found that they were particularly more corrupt than others and had more holdings in a lot of things and they did more disaster than others. But, you know, especially Bank of America and
They're turning
You
into
call
the
that
usual
shitty
suspects nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I mean, that was
So
what
it's not used as a
2008.
symbol. Is that
You look
how
at
I
it
should
now and-
understand it?
with banking,
Yes.
that he talked about the banking system.
I mean, he mentioned
Like
like
the
several
particular bank.
particular banks.
Yeah, I
And I
think
was
it,
wondering why not.
well, I'd only be projecting, I'd have to ask them, but those particular banks were such big conglomerates and backed a lot of things. that were
Yeah, I
very
was 9:22 right now, so we're gonna have to.
To the airport.
Huh?
The-
Oh, there.
Mike?
Well, I
Yeah,
think
well,
they're the
I'm
only
thinking.
ones.
Yeah, so you don't. He
sure
just
his name
mentioned
is.
the timing. It's 9:22. What would you like to do? You wanna? It was gonna be from 7 to 9. You're just no. They don't have to catch the flight today. Tomorrow.
I see. Oh,
Tomorrow.
okay.
Yeah, like tomorrow.
That's pretty late
That'd be a
flight.
midnight flight.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Yeah.
It's either a
Well, it
late
depends
or
on, I mean, Jack's doing a lot of work. Do you want to take it easy now, or what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now a few more questions we
Uh-huh.
have.
Okay.
Let's try to
Well, this is very exciting.
He wants to know
Yeah.
why PJ selected particular banks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because he could have just mentioned banks.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know.
When we went to
particular-
war, there was a bank in America very successful called the Bank of Italy.
Mhm.
And when we went to war with Italy, they changed the name to Bank of America. It's a good idea, isn't it? Okay. That was the Bank of America. We used to be the Bank of Italy. So the United Bank of Christ would get a lot of people to put their money in that bank because they feel they'd be less corrupt. But if you can name a bank for people's bank that care for people, you know. That's what people say. "Yeah, what's your sign now?" And some people say to me, "When were you born?" I say, "February the 8th, of course. You're this or that." And they go on and tell me why. And I said, I was wrong. It's June the 3rd. Oh, of course. They should be able to tell you when you were born by your values. It should work the opposite way too. That is in aviation, social change. Well, they say you were born in May, if it's a science. It should work both ways. But every time I give them a wrong date, they proceed to tell me, of course, you were born that way. You know.
Chuck, I know you've covered this a number of times, but since like the day I saw Zeitgeist Addendum, I've been pretty much talking to everybody, my family, my friends, any stranger that I can get to listen to me about the Venus Project. And I always get two questions, and you've covered this already, but just kind of like an expansion. The one kind of is, we'll never be alive to see this. That's one. Number two is, what about the holdouts? Now, you've covered this, the holdouts, like, okay,
And
I know
nations
the
that
idea-
won't join us.
yeah, well, I mean, but a little bit deeper is the idea of the resource-based economy. Step one is to take an inventory, and in that inventory, we might find certain areas that have a very needed resource. And I know a bunch of supposing, but suppose there's a group that is on that resource that are holdouts. And many people say, oh, well, it will definitely turn to violence. It always turns to violence about the scarcity thing. How do I answer that?
Well, you know Dubai, 10 years ago was a desert. Now it's a big city. And they're being bailed out by Saudi Arabia. The trouble is now all over the world, Greece, France, they're having trouble all over England, and it's getting worse in America. So it doesn't seem to be, well, this area seems to be doing all right, but they have their turn. It's just going to happen here too. And China is not exporting as much as it did. And so it's going to affect all the nations. Now's the best time for introducing that. If it gets terrible, it's going to be more difficult. The transition will be more difficult.
Let's say there's like, I don't know, some indigenous Amazon Indian tribe that won't leave their
We don't go
area.
to them
But
until
what if they have a certain resource that is needed?
Well, we would go over and say to them, what is your complaint? What do you need? And they say, well, there was bad hunting. We'd show them and give them things like a cell phone. They'd appreciate that, by the way.
Again, but like
And
that's
we give them whatever they need to make life better, and then ask them if they want to join with us on everything. They'll say no, but their kids, in order to maintain the cell phones, would have to study electronics.
okay. So time and patience.
And yes, we don't kill people. We know that it takes time, and that whatever time it takes, but there'll be people in society, like the advertising people, that understand the grammar of motives. And they will advise us in different areas of better approaches. More work will be done in the study of transition, how to transition people with the minimum pain. And if he comes up with a wrong idea, it won't work. If he comes with the right idea, it'll work. What determines which direction we take is how well the system works, not Fresco's ideas. Fresco may be obsolete in 2 weeks from now. And if somebody comes up with something better than nanotechnology, geez, a lot of things will be wiped out. Today you can be wiped out very fast by innovation. And if a country doesn't spend money on innovation, they will be bypassed by those that do.
Jack, I have one question.
That's all right.
It's about Zeitgeist Addendum. It might be a Peter Joseph's research, but at the last part of the movie says he mentioned J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and several other banks. Why specific to that bank? Like the you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think he found that they were particularly more corrupt than others and had more holdings in a lot of things and they did more disaster than others. But, you know, I don't know, especially Bank of America and
Bank of America.
They're turning into
Call
the
that
usual
shitty
suspects nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I mean, that was what 2008.
Symbol? Is that
You look
how
at
I
it
should
now and-
understand it?
oh, with banking,
Yes.
that he talked about the banking system.
I mean, he mentioned
Like
like
the
several
particular bank.
banks.
Yeah, I
And I
think
was
it,
wondering why not.
well, I'd only be projecting, I'd have to ask him, but those particular banks were such big
He
people.
was why PJ selected particular banks.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, because he could have just mentioned banks.
yeah,
All right.
I don't know.
When we went to
particular-
war, there was a bank in America very successful called the Bank of Italy.
Mhm.
And when we went to war, then they changed the name to Bank of America. Good idea, isn't it? Okay. That was the Bank of America. We used to be the Bank of Italy. So the United Bank of Christ would get a lot of people to put their money in that bank because they feel they'd be less corrupt. But if you can name a bank for people's bank that care for people, you know. That's what people say. "Yeah, what's your sign?" And some people say to me, "When were you born?" I say, "February the 8th, of course. You're this or that." And they go on and tell me why. And I said, I was wrong. It's June the 3rd. Oh, of course. They should be able to tell you when you were born by your values. It should work the opposite way too. Time is in aviation, social change. Well, they say you were born in May, if it's a science. It should work both ways. But every time I give them a wrong date, they proceed to tell me, of course, you were born that way. You know.
Chuck, I know you've covered this a number of times, but since like the day I saw Zeitgeist Addendum, I've been pretty much talking to everybody, my family, my friends, any stranger that I can get to listen to me about the Venus Project, and I always get two questions, and you've covered this already, but just kind of like an expansion. The one kind of is, we'll never be alive to see this. That's one. Number two is, what about the holdouts? Now, you've covered this, the holdouts, like, okay,
And
I know
nations
the
that
idea-
won't join us.
yeah, well, I mean, but a little bit deeper is the idea of the resource-based economy. Step one is to take an inventory, and in that inventory, we might find certain areas that have a very needed resource. And I know a bunch of supposing, but suppose there's a group that is on that resource that are holdouts. And many people say, oh, well, it will definitely turn to violence. It always turns to violence when about the scarcity thing. How do I answer that?
Well, you know, Dubai, 10 years ago was a desert. Now it's a big city. And they're being bailed out by Saudi Arabia. See, the trouble is now all over the world, Greece, France, they're having trouble all over England, and it's getting worse in America. So it doesn't seem to be, well, this area seems to be doing all right, but they have their turn. It's just going to happen here too. And China is not exporting as much as it did. And so it's going to affect all the nations. Now is the best time for introducing that. If it gets terrible, it's going to be more difficult. The transition will be more difficult.
Let's say there's like, I don't know, some indigenous Amazon Indian tribe that won't leave their
We don't
area.
go to them
But
until
what if they have a certain resource that is needed?
Well, we would go over and say to them, what is your complaint? What do you need? and they say, well, it was bad hunting, we'd show them and give them things like a cell phone. They'd appreciate that, by the way.
Again, but like
And
that's
we give them whatever they need to make life better, and then ask them if they want to join with us on everything. They'll say no, but their kids, in order to maintain the cell phones, would have to study electronics.
okay. So time and patience.
And yes, we don't kill people. We know that it takes time, and that whatever time it takes, but there'll be people in society, like the advertising people, that understand the grammar of motives, and they will advise us on different areas for better approaches. More work will be done in the study of transition, how to transition people with the minimum pain. And if he comes up with a wrong idea, it won't work. If he comes with the right idea, it'll work. What determines which direction we take is how well the system works, not Fresco's ideas. Fresco may be obsolete in 2 weeks from now. And if somebody comes up with something better than nanotechnology, geez, a lot of things will be wiped out. Today you can be wiped out very fast. Innovation. And if a country doesn't spend money on innovation, they will be bypassed by those that do.
The second part of the question you answered great. The first part of the question again was many people, and I heard this after the Tokyo lecture. Well, we'll never see this. And the way I answer it generally is, you know, people these days, we think of the future in an 80-year lifespan. The future is just 80 years from now, or whatever my lifespan will be. And I said, you know, in science fiction novels like, I don't know, the Dune series or whatever, people say, oh, he's from Iraq, he's an Iraqi, or he's a Martian, or a Venetian, you know, and that's how people, but we don't do that. I'm a university teacher, and I'll ask my students, are you Japanese or are you an Earthling? And 99.9% say, guess, Japanese. We don't look at ourselves that way, and so we don't look at our future that way. How can we get people to do that? To look to look further into the future as, I mean, and sometimes I'll say, well, you know, Jacques 94 years old, you know, and he inspires me just because of that. Well, I don't know, I mean, we have our hopes, but, you know, and that's generally how I answered it. The other day I was listening to Peter Joseph's last radio thing, and he made the metaphor of the cathedrals, that generations created cathedrals, and the first generations, they knew they'd never see it, but they felt, you know,
what I
positive.
usually say to that is that every new idea was always met with that objection. They always say it would never happen. You know, anything, the gas light, the computer, and I always say that, well, I'm really glad that the people who invented all these things didn't think that way, because then you wouldn't be enjoying your cell phone, you wouldn't be enjoying your computer, you wouldn't have electricity, you know, so those people will be bypassed in the future.
In some weird psychological way, I think it actually, the attractiveness of the Venus Project might actually turn people off, because they're like, this is great, I'll never see it.
Maybe if it was approached in a more personal way, like if you said, well, maybe you will, or maybe you won't see it, but what about your children or your grandchildren?
That's
What about your
generally how
family? You know, and try to make it, you know, to where, because people are not going to react to something usually, at least now, unless usually they have some kind of personal gain from it. So that means that, you know, you have to give it to them and say, well, you are going to gain from this because of this. Now, if you don't, then your kids will, or your grandkids will. Maybe.
Jacques had a couple little skits that you were going to use in the beginning of your film to do away with not in our dayers. Can you go over those little skits? Those are good.
Our film has two farmers walking down the road to the countryside.
Country farmers.
And one of them says to the other, "You hear about them Wright brothers?" "No, what about them?" "They're trying to build a flying machine." And you hear that cackle. He ain't never going to fly. If the good Lord wanted man to fly, he'd have been born with wings. He spits. You know, and that's a cinch the deal when you spit. And then the right knife goes putting over. Slow, put, in the film. And a guy and false teeth drop down. That's just for humor. How's that? He says, "I've changed my mind." He didn't change his mind. He was changed by events. Then it shows two Germans in Germany walking along. Says, "Hello, Lutz." This I got written script. "Did you hear about the Russians?" He says, "What about the Russians?" He says, "They claim that they launched a satellite out into space." How can you see what the Russians say they launched out into space? They laugh, and then you see the headlines. Then it says, shows another guy, says, "Not in our time, everything new." That's what you're dealing with. Not in our time. Are you not in our time? Did you expect to see the moon landing in your lifetime? Did you expect to see ships exploring the universe? A lot of people don't know that's happening now. Did you expect to see a computer that puts you in touch with all countries and all kinds of information? Did you expect that? The guy said, "No, then you're a lousy predictor of the future." You really are. But if a person says, "I don't know what the future is," that's an honest person. So your best bet is to spend time with as many honest people as you can that say, "I believe in God because I don't know where all this came from." If you can furnish that answer, if he says, "Where did all this come from?" If you know the answer to that in his terms, I'll try to answer it quickly anyway. If you take a steel ball and heat it to 10 million degrees, it becomes radiant energy. But the steel ball still exists as particles. Now if you take a ball of ice and it melts, it becomes water vapor all over the place. If it's hot, it becomes steam. But matter has never been created or destroyed. It can change. That's why I tell people, if I kick the bucket, if you bury me 1 foot down or 6 inches down in the soil, all the plants get a little taller above my grave, and all the worms get fatter. And does fresco still exist? Oh, what do you mean by exist? The worms are fatter, the plants are taller, they're made up of our substance. We're made up of everything we've eaten. Without food, we get thinner because we digest ourselves. You understand? So the stuff you're made of has always been around. Maybe in fish that lived 1,000 years ago, and everything you eat is converted to living human cells. When you eat a pig or a rabbit or a chicken, their cells are converted to human cells. So when you die, your substance of gases go off, plants absorb the carbon dioxide, and they grow. So we live in one gigantic circle, continuous cycle of events. Some stupid scientists want to know how the universe began. The word beginning comes from the church, religion. The universe never began, according to me. It's always undergoing change, exploding. Why do you call an explosion the beginning of the universe? When it collapses, why isn't that the beginning? Why do you call a seed the beginning of a plant? It's the end product of a plant. A new genetic arrangement. A baby is not the beginning of a human being. It's when two adults get together sexually, mate. It's a product, the end product of two adults mating. But it's not the beginning. The word beginning, because the seed is small, they call it a beginning. That's not how do you know it's a beginning? Isn't it the end product of a plant? That's the best a plant can do. So seeds undergo continuous change. No seed, if you dig into the earth geologically, you'll find that the palm trees of 2 million years ago were not like they are today. We know from that evidence that all things change. I've never known any society that remained except the hunters, headhunters of the Amazon, way up the Amazon River. But they'll be around for a little while, then they'll disappear.
Cell phones.
So all things change. You can't design a society and say, this is it, this is utopia. That means nobody thinks anymore that the computers that exist are the best. There's no more to go. There are no utopias. There can't be any final frontiers. Do you understand that? You can't design a camera and say, that's it. Other people will surpass you if you do that. So I see the future as going on and on without any final frontiers. That's well. How do you picture people in the future? Will they be as beautiful as we are? Well, I now know, ever since I was a kid, I I told you this before, if everybody had ears or a nose a foot long, you'd have surgery done. Do you understand that? Because people run down the street and look at you. Look at that freak. That's why I tell people there's no such thing as beauty. If your culture had horns and pointed ears up to here, that would be normal to you. So when you start teaching people that the white race is beautiful, if you're born in the Ubangi tribe with a plate lips, the guy gets down on his knees, he says, your hair, your eyes, your big lips, or pointed head, whatever it is that society looks like, to them it's beautiful. So when I was in the South Pacific Islands, the kids would grab a fat worm, what looked to me like a fat worm, off a tree, squeeze it, and eat it. Then when I saw all the kids doing that, I figured there's something wrong with me, if they're all doing it. So I tried it, and it tastes like an eclair, if you know what that tastes like.
A worm? Is it real? A real worm?
Yeah.
Really?
It was not a typical worm.
Right.
It was the worm they ate. So I figured there's something wrong with me. But I could go, they say, you eat lobster? No? I said, yeah, funny lobster. Okay, you understand
It's
what I
a
mean?
scavenger.
Since I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk at them. I used to point to some person
Mm.
to go for a walk. Let's go for a walk. I'd use sign language, whatever, because they spoke pidgin English, some of them. But they spoke more French, like patois and Polynesian mixture. And they told me things I could not believe. You know, I think I mentioned waterfall that flowed upward. Did I mention that to you guys? So a lot of the kids told me, yeah, and a lot of the older people said, there's a waterfall that flows upward. So I said, where is that? They said in Manoa Valley, that's on the Honolulu. It's a precipice with a lava tube where water comes out, but the ocean wind goes up against that cliff, and the water turned up and went back on the land. But there was prevailing winds. Of course, they didn't know the answer, but I had to check it out. And you check out, I think I told you about the halo, didn't I? Holy man with a halo. There's skin diseases that are luminescent. The book is Anomalies and Curiosities in Medicine. There are waves in the ocean that become fluorescent. You ever see that?
Yeah.
Certain time of the year, where the waves break, they glow at night.
Oh yes.
And if you run along the beach, you leave fluorescent footprints. Well, there's skin diseases that glow too. They thought the guy was a holy man when they saw that paper. You see, so people don't always know what they see, and they don't know how to interpret what they see, and you have to give them a system of evaluating things, and that's what I had to do. In the South Seas, everybody listened to the witch doctor. When the volcano erupted, they said, he mad at us, must sacrifice young people in the volcano. So they threw a couple of kids in, and if it still made rumbling, they threw other people in, or your brother-in-law, or your sister-in-law, but never the witch doctor or the king. You understand? So they had to account for things, because the witch doctor was considered the wise man. They said, lightning, God angry, or he angry, or nature angry at people in this tribe, make sacrifice. So later they sacrificed sheep and things rather than people. But they always thought the earth was angry, that's why there was an earthquake. Why else would there be an earthquake? That's right. So right and wrong comes in the Bible. There's nothing right, nothing wrong. There are more efficient ways of doing things. That's what they're trying to talk about. There are more effective theories related to where matter comes from than those that are less effective. And you didn't get a disease because your family sinned. You know what I mean? There was disease spreading. Certain times of the year, certain bacteria become dominant and they can affect you. But they say the children shall suffer for the sins of the parents. So everybody went to church because they didn't want to get sick. The church was a started out as a racket, but the followers were real, and the young kids that became priests. But in the beginning, here's where religion came from. The king didn't want, or the wealthy people didn't want people breaking into their home, stealing things. They're the only people that had anything worth stealing. So they put soldiers outside their homes. And a guy came to the king and said, how many soldiers do you have? 20 soldiers. He said, I got a way of preventing people from stealing things. He says, you won't need 20 soldiers. Give me 9 barrels of whiskey or whatever you want for that information. So here's what he said. This guy was a magician. He can take fire, whoosh, blow it out, and when normal people see that, they'll bow in front. He says, I come from the one on high, and the one on high can see right through your building. And if you steal things, you burn eternally, or something like that. So the people were scared, and the king didn't have to have that many guards around. So if you teach people religion, if a guy works in a flashlight factory, he says, there's thousands of flashlights. I think I'll take a double home. But if you give them a conscience, they don't take anything home because they feel guilty about stealing. But the king steals continuously. He invades another country, takes their women, their gold, their buildings, their people, everything. Think about it. When the United States won the war with Germany, they kidnapped the German scientists and brought them to Wright Field and the aircraft factories. They took the rockets that the Germans had and brought them to America. I want you to know that stealing is another phony word. Every corporation lies and steals. That's why they have fine print. It's hard to read. The fine print is to discourage people from reading that they had to tell the truth. But they can't tell the truth in big lettering. They do on cigarettes now in America. It says injurious to health. Big lettering on it. They had to. They were pressed to do that by people dying of lung cancer. So what we do, the Venus Project, we show people dying of lung cancer in hospital. Real film, choking, not being able to breathe. We show the black lungs. They're pink ordinarily. And when you stretch lung tissue, it yields. But when you smoke for 20 years, it tears when you blow on it. And we show these guys dying, agonized, and we don't say no to tobacco. We just show the effects of long-term smoking. Is that clear? Now if you say, well, I'm still addicted, we show other films too, how it affects the heart, blood pressure and everything. We show people with those afflictions. Do you understand? That seems to work far better than saying no to drugs. Or when you show a movie star smoking a cigarette, they think it's smart to smoke a cigarette because Clara Bow, in my day, smoked a cigarette. Or Jennifer Jones smoked a cigarette. You show them in front of a Cadillac instead of a Volkswagen. Show a movie star top brass, the president, so I drive a Volkswagen. Well, that'll interfere with the sales of Cadillacs and Rolls Royce. But if you say a Rolls Royce is the finest piece of machinery ever made, and show movie stars driving it, that will incentive for wealthy people to want to wear a real diamond.